Most people think money and wealth are the same thing. If someone drives a luxury car, wears expensive clothes, and posts vacation photos online, people immediately assume they're rich. But Adam Smith believed most people misunderstand what wealth actually is. And in Book 2 of The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith introduces one of the most important ideas in economics, the difference between money and capital. At first, those words sound similar, but according to Smith, they are completely different things. And understanding that difference can change the way you think about business, investing, and even your own life. Money is not the same as capital. Imagine two people. Person A receives $1 million. He buys luxury watches, a sports car, designer clothes, expensive vacations. The money disappears quickly. Now imagine person B receives the same amount of money. She buys equipment, starts a business, invests in software, hires employees, builds systems that continue producing income year after year. Both people had the same amount of money, but only one created capital. This is the key idea. Money by itself is not capital. Capital is anything that helps produce future wealth. That's a massive difference. Smith argued that societies become rich not because people spend money, but because they build productive capital. So what counts as capital? According to Adam Smith, capital includes things like machines, tools, factories, equipment, buildings, ships, infrastructure, productive businesses. Today, we could add software, data centers, AI systems, warehouses, logistics networks, intellectual property. The common thread is simple. These things continue generating value over time. A factory produces products. A truck delivers goods. A machine increases efficiency. A software platform serves millions of users. Capital helps society produce more output, and the more productive capital a society builds, the wealthier that society tends to become. Consumption versus investment. This is where Adam Smith's ideas become incredibly practical, because every economy and every individual constantly faces the same decision: consume now or build capital for the future. Let's say you suddenly get a large bonus at work. You have options. You could spend it all immediately: new phone, luxury shopping, fancy dinners, trips. Or you could invest part of it into something productive: education, business equipment, investments, skills, assets that generate future returns. One choice creates temporary pleasure. The other increases future productive power. Smith believed prosperous societies are the ones that consistently direct resources toward productive investment instead of pure consumption. That doesn't mean enjoying life is bad. Smith wasn't saying people should never spend money. His point was about long-term growth. A society that consumes everything it produces struggles to expand. A society that reinvests part of its wealth can keep growing stronger. Why capital changes everything. Imagine a farmer 300 years ago using only his bare hands. His productivity would be limited. Now give him tools, then give him better tools, then tractors, then irrigation systems, then modern technology. Suddenly, the same farmer can produce food for thousands of people instead of just a few. What changed? Capital. The tools increased productivity. This is one of the biggest reasons modern societies became dramatically wealthier than earlier civilizations. Workers became surrounded by more productive capital. Machines multiplied human effort. Technology accelerated production. Infrastructure improved transportation. Factories scaled manufacturing. Capital amplifies labor. That's why countries with strong infrastructure and advanced industries often produce far more wealth than countries lacking those systems. Capital makes specialization possible. Back in Book 1, Smith explained the power of specialization. But specialization alone isn't enough. Workers also need capital. A factory worker without machines can only produce so much. A software engineer without computers can't build software. A delivery company without vehicles cannot operate efficiently. Capital allows specialized workers to become vastly more productive. This is why businesses constantly invest in equipment, technology, and systems. They're trying to increase output, and higher output usually means higher profits and greater economic growth. The world's richest companies understand this. Look at some of the world's most successful companies. Amazon spent years building warehouses, logistics systems, and cloud infrastructure. Tesla invested enormous amounts into factories and manufacturing systems. NVIDIA invested heavily in advanced chip development. These companies didn't become powerful simply because they had cash. They became powerful because they built productive capital. Their systems generate future income at enormous scale. That's exactly the kind of process Adam Smith was describing centuries ago. Poor countries versus rich countries. Smith's ideas also help explain why some countries stay poor while others become wealthy. Poor countries are not always lacking hardworking people. In many cases, they lack productive capital. They may lack infrastructure, reliable transportation, modern factories, efficient banking systems, advanced technology, stable institutions. Without productive capital, labor remains less efficient, and when productivity stays low, wealth creation becomes difficult. Meanwhile, wealthy countries usually possess enormous networks of productive assets: roads, ports, power grids, financial systems, factories, digital infrastructure. These systems allow workers to produce far more value. The real meaning of wealth. This leads to one of Adam Smith's deepest insights. Real wealth is not about looking rich. It's about owning or building things that continue producing value over time. Many people confuse income with wealth. Others confuse consumption with success. Smith focused on something deeper: productive capacity. Can your resources continue generating future value? Can they create more output tomorrow than today? That's what truly drives long-term prosperity. The foundation of economic growth. Book 2 of The Wealth of Nations begins shifting the conversation from simple trade towards something even bigger: economic growth. How do nations continuously become richer over time? How do small businesses grow into giant corporations? How do poor economies industrialize? Adam Smith's answer begins with capital accumulation. Societies grow wealthier when they build productive systems instead of consuming everything immediately. That process sounds simple, but it changed the world. And it leads directly into the next major idea of Book 2: why saving and reinvestment may be the hidden engine behind every wealthy civilization in history.
Today, saving money is almost seen as boring. People admire spending, luxury lifestyles, expensive cars, designer brands. Social media constantly pushes the idea that success means showing off what you can buy. Meanwhile, the person quietly saving and investing often looks less impressive. But according to Adam Smith, that quiet saver may actually be doing something far more important, not just for themselves, but for the entire economy. In Book 2 of The Wealth of Nations, Smith introduces one of the most powerful ideas in economics. Nations become wealthy through saving and investment, not through endless consumption. At first, this sounds strange, because modern economies constantly encourage spending. Governments want consumers to spend. Businesses want customers to spend. Advertising exists to make people spend. So when Smith argues that saving helps build wealth, many people immediately think, wouldn't saving slow the economy down? But Smith wasn't talking about hiding money under a mattress. He was talking about turning saved resources into productive capital, and that changes everything. Saving is future production. Imagine a small village. Every year, the villagers produce exactly enough food and goods to survive. At the end of each year, they consume everything. Nothing is left over. What happens next year? The village stays exactly the same. No new tools, no improved farming equipment, no larger workshops, no expanded production, no growth. Now imagine a different village. This village decides not to consume everything immediately. Instead, they save part of their production. With those saved resources, they build better tools, new irrigation systems, storage facilities, improved equipment. The following year, productivity increases. The village produces more than before. That extra production allows even more investment, and over time, the gap between the two villages becomes enormous. This is the core idea Adam Smith was describing. Saving creates capital. Capital increases productivity. Higher productivity creates more wealth. Why rich societies reinvest? Think about how successful businesses operate. A company earns profits. Now it has a choice: spend everything immediately, or reinvest part of the profits into growth. Most successful companies choose reinvestment. They build new factories, hire more workers, develop better technology, expand distribution systems, improve products. Why? Because reinvestment increases future productive power. This process scales beyond individual businesses. Entire nations become wealthier when large amounts of savings flow into productive investment. Factories get built, infrastructure expands, technology improves, industries grow, workers become more productive, economic output rises. This is one reason industrialization transformed the world so dramatically. Countries that accumulated and reinvested capital often experienced explosive economic growth. Consumption feels good, investment builds the future. Adam Smith understood something about human nature that still applies today. Consumption feels rewarding immediately. Investment usually requires patience. If you buy luxury goods today, you experience pleasure right away. If you invest in productive assets, the reward often arrives years later.
That's why long-term thinking matters so much. Imagine two young workers starting their careers. Person A spends nearly every paycheck immediately. Person B invests part of their income into education, skills, businesses, or productive assets. At first, person A may appear more successful. Better car, more vacations, more visible lifestyle. But 10 or 20 years later, the outcome may look completely different. Because productive investments compound over time. The same principle applies to countries. Societies focused entirely on immediate consumption often struggle to build long-term productive capacity. Societies that consistently invest in infrastructure, technology, education, and industry tend to grow stronger over generations. Capital accumulation is slow at first. One reason people underestimate saving is because the results often appear slowly. At first, progress seems small. A business reinvests profits for years before becoming large. A country builds infrastructure gradually over decades. An investor compounds returns over long periods of time. But eventually, the effects become enormous. This is one of the hidden powers of capital accumulation. Growth compounds. A single machine improves productivity. Higher productivity creates larger profits. Larger profits fund additional investment. Additional investment creates even higher productivity. Over time, the process accelerates. This is why wealthy economies often keep becoming wealthier. They possess large amounts of accumulated productive capital already generating future growth. The Industrial Revolution changed everything. Smith's ideas became especially important during the Industrial Revolution. Before industrialization, most economies grew very slowly. People relied heavily on manual labor. Production limits were severe. But once societies began accumulating large amounts of industrial capital, everything changed. Factories appeared. Machines multiplied output. Transportation improved. Agricultural productivity exploded. Economic growth accelerated at a pace humanity had rarely seen before. This transformation didn't happen because people suddenly became smarter. It happened because productive capital dramatically increased human efficiency. Machines allowed workers to produce far more than before. And those machines existed because previous generations had saved and invested resources rather than consuming everything immediately. Why debt and consumption can become dangerous. Smith also warned about societies becoming too focused on wasteful consumption. If too many resources flow towards short-term pleasure instead of productive investment, long-term growth can weaken. This idea feels surprisingly modern today. Many economies rely heavily on consumer spending fueled by debt. People borrow money to finance lifestyles. Governments accumulate massive deficits. Companies sometimes prioritize short-term appearances over long-term productivity. Smith would likely ask a simple question. Are resources being used to build future productive capacity, or are they simply being consumed? That distinction matters enormously over time. The countries that think long-term. Look at countries that experienced rapid economic development over the last century. Many followed a similar pattern. High savings rates, heavy investment, infrastructure expansion, industry growth, technology development, education investment. These societies directed large portions of their resources towards building productive systems. The results transformed entire nations. Meanwhile, countries struggling with unstable institutions, weak investment systems, or chronic capital shortages often faced slower growth. Again, Smith's central point appears. Saving alone is not enough. Savings must become productive capital. The bigger lesson. Adam Smith wasn't arguing that people should never enjoy life. He wasn't saying consumption is evil. His deeper point was about balance and long-term prosperity. A society that consumes absolutely everything today sacrifices part of its future growth. A society that consistently reinvests part of its output builds stronger productive capacity over time. This principle applies everywhere. Individuals, businesses, cities, entire nations. The ability to delay some consumption and build productive capital is one of the foundations of long-term wealth creation. And once Smith establishes this idea, he moves into an even more controversial topic. Not all labor contributes to economic growth in the same way. Some forms of work, he argued, directly expand future production. Others do not. That distinction would become one of the most debated parts of the wealth of nations, and it still sparks arguments today.
This might be one of the most controversial ideas in all of the wealth of nations. In Book 2, Adam Smith makes a distinction that still sparks debate today. He divides labor into two categories: productive labor, unproductive labor. Now, before people get angry, it's important to understand what Smith actually meant. He was not saying certain people are worthless. He was not insulting workers. And he definitely wasn't saying some jobs don't matter. What he was trying to understand was something much more specific. Which kinds of labor help expand a nation's future productive capacity? In other words, which types of work help an economy grow richer over time?
What Smith meant by productive labor. According to Adam Smith, productive labor creates goods or systems that continue generating future wealth. Think about a factory worker building machines. Those machines can continue producing products for years. Or imagine construction workers building a bridge. That bridge helps transportation, trade, and economic activity long into the future. A software engineer building a platform. An engineer designing manufacturing equipment. A farmer producing food. A builder constructing infrastructure. These forms of labor create lasting productive value. They increase society's ability to produce more output later. That's why Smith called them productive. What he meant by unproductive labor. Now here's where things get controversial. Smith describes some forms of labor as unproductive because they did not directly create lasting capital or future production. In his time, examples included servants, royal court workers, entertainers attached to aristocrats, certain government officials. Again, this sounds harsh today. But remember the context. Smith was analyzing economic growth, not human worth. His argument was basically this. Some work produces assets or systems that continue generating future economic output. Other work provides immediate services that disappear once performed. For example, imagine hiring musicians to perform at a private party. The service may be enjoyable, but once the night ends, the economic output disappears. Now compare that factory may continue producing value for decades. Smith focused heavily on whether labor expanded future productive power. Why this idea still matters. Even though the terminology sounds outdated, the core question is still incredibly relevant today. Modern economies constantly debate: which industries create long-term growth? Which investments expand productive capacity? Which sectors generate sustainable value? Think about governments investing in infrastructure, roads, ports, energy systems, internet networks. Why do countries spend huge amounts of money on these projects? Because they increase future productivity. Now think about companies investing heavily in research and development. They're trying to create future productive advantages. The same logic appears everywhere. Smith's basic insight was that some economic activities strengthen future production more directly than others. The debate gets complicated. Of course, modern economies are much more complex than the world Smith lived in. Today, many service industries create enormous value. A software designer may produce digital products used by millions. A teacher may increase human capital by educating future workers. A doctor improves health, allowing society to function more efficiently. A content creator can build businesses worth billions. So today's definition of productive labor is much broader than Smith's original version. Still, Smith's core concern remains surprisingly modern. Economies need more than consumption. Remember what Book 2 is really about: capital accumulation, economic growth, future productive power. Smith worried that societies could become too focused on immediate consumption rather than building long-term productive systems. Imagine an economy where almost all resources go toward luxury entertainment and short-term pleasure. Very little investment, very little infrastructure, very little innovation, very little industrial development. That society might look wealthy temporarily, but over time, growth could slow down. Meanwhile, societies investing heavily in technology, infrastructure, manufacturing, education, productive systems often strengthen their long-term economic capacity. This is why governments care so much about productivity growth, because productivity is what ultimately raises living standards over time. Social media makes this debate feel modern again. Interestingly, Smith's argument feels surprisingly relevant in today's internet economy. Think about modern debates around speculation, influencer culture, luxury lifestyles, viral entertainment, online attention economies. People constantly ask, are we building real productive capacity? Or are we mostly consuming attention and entertainment? Again, this doesn't mean entertainment has no value. People clearly value entertainment. That's why they pay for it. But Smith would likely still ask, does this activity increase society's future productive power? That question sits at the heart of his economic thinking, the hidden engine behind prosperity. One reason some countries industrialized faster than others is because large portions of their resources flowed into productive expansion. Factories, machines, railroads, power systems, technology, education. These investments increased future output. And once productivity starts compounding, economic growth can accelerate dramatically. This is one reason rich economies often keep advancing. They continuously reinvest into systems that increase future production. Smith's real point. At its core, Adam Smith's argument was never about attacking workers. It was about understanding growth. Which activities help societies produce more wealth tomorrow than they produce today? That's the real question. And once you understand that question, Book 2 starts making much more sense. Smith is slowly building a theory of economic expansion. How does a society go from poor to rich? How does productivity continuously increase? How do nations create long-term prosperity? His answer keeps pointing back to the same idea. Build productive capacity. Invest in systems that increase future output. And that leads directly into the next major topic: how capital itself expands production, transforms industries, and completely reshapes entire economies over time.
Imagine two workers trying to do the exact same job. The first worker has only basic hand tools. The second worker has advanced machines, better equipment, powerful software, efficient transportation, and modern infrastructure supporting every step of the process. Who produces more? The answer is obvious, and this simple observation sits at the center of Book 2 of The Wealth of Nations. According to Adam Smith, one of the biggest reasons economies grow is because capital continuously increases human productivity. Capital doesn't just add more resources to society, it multiplies what human beings are capable of producing. And once that process begins, entire civilizations can transform. Labor alone has limits. Imagine trying to build a skyscraper using only human hands. No cranes, no trucks, no steel equipment, no power tools, no computers. The project would take forever. Maybe it would never even happen. Now compare that to modern construction. Machines lift enormous materials. Software designs structures. Transportation networks deliver supplies efficiently. Factories produce standardized components. Thousands of specialized workers coordinate together using advanced tools. The difference is massive. What changed? Capital. The workers themselves are still human, but productive capital dramatically expands what their labor can accomplish. This was one of Adam Smith's most important insights. Economic growth happens when workers become supported by more productive systems. Capital multiplies human effort. Think about a farmer from hundreds of years ago. Using simple tools, that farmer could only grow a limited amount of food. Now compare that to modern agriculture. One farmer today can produce enough food to feed thousands of people. Why? Because modern farmers are surrounded by productive capital: tractors, irrigation systems, fertilizers, GPS technology, advanced machinery, transportation networks. The farmer's labor becomes amplified. Capital acts almost like a force multiplier. The same principle appears everywhere. A programmer with powerful computers can build software used by millions. A factory worker using advanced robotics can produce vastly more products than workers using manual tools. A logistics company with warehouses and delivery systems can move goods across entire countries efficiently. Capital increases output per worker, and when output per worker rises, economies become wealthier. This is why productivity matters so much. Adam Smith constantly returns to productivity because productivity is the real engine of rising living standards. If workers produce more value per hour, society can generate more wealth overall. Higher productivity often leads to higher incomes, lower prices, more goods and services, better living standards, greater economic growth. This is why economists care so much about productivity statistics even today, because over long periods of time, productivity growth largely determines whether societies become richer, and capital plays a huge role in driving that productivity growth. Factories changed the world. This process became incredibly visible during the Industrial Revolution. Before industrialization, most production depended heavily on manual labor. Output remained relatively low. Economic growth moved slowly. Then factories appeared. Machines began transforming production. Suddenly workers could produce goods at scales humanity had rarely seen before: textiles, steel, transportation, agriculture, manufacturing. Entire industries expanded rapidly. The key wasn't simply that people worked harder. The key was that workers became supported by large amounts of productive capital. Machines multiplied output. Infrastructure accelerated trade. Industrial systems increased efficiency. This transformed entire economies.
Countries that industrialized quickly often became dramatically wealthier. Capital also creates jobs. One interesting thing about productive capital is that it often creates additional economic opportunities. Imagine someone builds a factory. The factory itself is capital, but now the factory also needs workers, managers, suppliers, transportation, maintenance, engineers, accountants. One productive investment can generate entire economic ecosystems around it. The same thing happens today with technology companies. When a major tech company expands, entire industries often grow alongside it. Data centers require energy systems. Software companies need skilled workers. Manufacturing plants create supply chains. Capital investment spreads through the economy. Infrastructure is capital too. People sometimes think of capital only as private business investment, but infrastructure matters enormously as well. Roads, ports, railways, internet networks, power grids, water systems. These things increase productivity across entire economies. Imagine two countries. One has reliable transportation and stable electricity. The other has constant blackouts and poor roads. Even if the workers are equally hardworking, the first country will usually produce far more output. Why? Because productive infrastructure supports economic activity. This is one reason governments often invest heavily in infrastructure projects. Strong infrastructure lowers costs, increases efficiency, and allows businesses to operate more effectively. Technology is modern capital. In Adam Smith's time, capital mostly meant physical tools and machinery. Today, technology has expanded the concept dramatically. Modern productive capital includes artificial intelligence, cloud computing, robotics, automation systems, advanced software, semiconductor technology. Companies like NVIDIA, Microsoft, and Tesla invest enormous amounts into productive systems that increase efficiency and scale. These investments help workers produce far more output than previous generations could imagine. In many ways, modern technology is simply the newest form of capital expansion. Why some countries grow faster than others. Smith's framework also helps explain why economic growth differs across countries. Some societies consistently invest in infrastructure, education, industry, technology, productive businesses. Others struggle with instability, corruption, weak institutions, or lack of investment. Over time, those differences compound. Countries that continuously build productive capital often experience rising productivity and higher living standards. Countries that fail to accumulate productive systems may remain trapped with lower output and slower growth. Again, Smith's logic keeps pointing back to the same principle. Long-term prosperity depends heavily on productive capacity. Capital creates a growth cycle. Here's where the process becomes really powerful. Capital increases productivity. Higher productivity creates larger profits and higher incomes. Those profits and savings can then fund even more investment, which creates even more productivity. This cycle can continue for decades, and once an economy enters that cycle successfully, growth can accelerate dramatically. That's when wealthy economies often keep expanding. Past investment creates the foundation for future investment. The bigger lesson. Book 2 of The Wealth of Nations is gradually revealing something enormous. Modern prosperity didn't appear by accident. It emerged because societies learned how to continuously expand productive capacity. Capital is not just about money sitting in banks. Capital is about building systems that allow human beings to produce more value over time. Factories, machines, technology, infrastructure, industrial systems. All of these things increase economic output. And when output expands faster than population growth, living standards rise. This is one of the deepest ideas in economics. Wealth grows when productivity grows, and productivity grows when societies accumulate productive capital. But this entire system depends on something fragile: trust. Because large-scale investment becomes difficult if people cannot safely lend, borrow, and move money through the economy. And that leads directly into the next major topic of Book 2, how banks, credit, and financial systems helped transform the modern world.
Imagine a world without banks. No bank accounts, no loans, no mortgages, no business financing, no credit cards, no online payments. Every business would need to grow only from the cash sitting in someone's pocket. Economic growth would slow down dramatically. Huge companies would almost never exist. Modern cities would look completely different. And this is exactly why Adam Smith believed banking and credit systems were so important. In Book 2 of The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith explains how banks help transform economies by turning idle money into productive capital. This idea changed the world. Money sitting still creates nothing. Imagine a wealthy merchant hides gold under his floorboards. The money stays there for years. What happens? Nothing. The gold produces no goods, creates no jobs, builds no factories, generates no innovation. It simply sits there. Now imagine that same money enters a banking system. The bank lends part of it to entrepreneurs. One person opens a workshop. Another buys equipment. Another expands a factory. Another builds transportation systems. Suddenly, the same money starts moving through the economy, creating productive activity. This is one of the core functions of banks. Banks connect savers with borrowers. They move unused money toward productive investment. And according to Smith, this process dramatically increases economic growth. Banks multiply economic activity. Think about how difficult business expansion would be without credit. Imagine a talented young entrepreneur with a great idea but very little money. Without financing, the business might never exist. Now imagine that entrepreneur can borrow capital. Suddenly, equipment can be purchased, workers can be hired, production can begin, growth becomes possible. Credit allows economies to move faster. It allows productive ideas to expand before individuals personally accumulate massive fortunes. This became especially important during industrialization. Factories were expensive. Infrastructure projects required enormous investment. Large-scale production demanded huge amounts of capital. Banks and financial systems helped provide that capital. Without modern banking, industrial economies would have grown far more slowly. Credit is built on trust. But here's the important part. The entire system depends on trust. When a bank lends money, it trusts the borrower to repay it. When depositors place money in a bank, they trust the bank to protect it. When businesses accept digital payments, they trust the financial system. Modern economies run on trust more than most people realize. In fact, much of modern money is no longer physical. Most transactions today are just numbers moving between accounts. Yet people accept those numbers as valuable because they trust the system behind them. That trust allows billions of transactions to happen every single day. Without trust, the entire system begins to break down. Why paper money was revolutionary? In Adam Smith's time, paper money was still relatively new compared to gold and silver coins, and many people distrusted it. After all, paper itself has little intrinsic value. You can't eat it, you can't build with it. So why would anyone accept it? Because paper money represented something larger: confidence. People believed they could exchange it later for real goods and services. Smith recognized that paper money and banking systems could make economies more efficient. Instead of transporting large amounts of heavy metal coins everywhere, paper currency made trade easier and faster. More importantly, banks could use deposits to support productive lending. This increased the speed of economic activity. Banks help capital flow where it's needed. Imagine a society without banks. Some people have extra money but no productive business ideas. Others have excellent business ideas but lack money. Without a financial system, these two groups struggle to connect. Banks help solve that problem. They channel savings toward investment. In many ways, banks act like the circulatory system of an economy. They help move capital toward productive opportunities. Factories get financed, homes get built, businesses expand. Technology develops, infrastructure projects move forward. All because financial systems allow resources to flow efficiently. But credit can also become dangerous. Adam Smith also understood that credit systems contain risks. Because when lending becomes reckless, financial systems can become unstable. This still happens today. Banks sometimes lend too aggressively. Investors take excessive risks. Asset bubbles form, debt expands too quickly, and eventually confidence collapses. When trust disappears, panic spreads fast. People rush to withdraw money, businesses lose financing, economic activity slows down. This is why financial crises often feel so severe. Modern history is filled with examples. Banking collapses, debt crises, stock market crashes, housing bubbles. Once trust breaks, economies can freeze surprisingly quickly. Smith recognized that healthy financial systems require stability and confidence. The invisible power of financial systems. Most people rarely think about banking systems during normal life. You tap a card, send a transfer, receive a paycheck, take out a loan. Everything feels automatic. But beneath that convenience sits an incredibly complex system coordinating enormous amounts of economic activity. Banks help determine which businesses grow, which industries expand, where investment flows, how quickly economies develop. Financial systems quietly shape the future of entire societies. Why some economies grow faster. Smith's ideas also help explain why strong financial institutions matter so much. Countries with stable banking systems often experience faster economic growth because businesses can access capital more easily. Entrepreneurs can expand, investments can scale, infrastructure can be financed. Meanwhile, countries with unstable financial systems often struggle with slower growth because investment becomes difficult and risky. Without reliable credit systems, productive expansion slows down. Modern technology changed banking again. Today, banking looks very different from Smith's world. Digital payments move instantly. Global investment flows across borders. Online banking operates 24 hours a day. Financial technology companies now compete alongside traditional banks. Companies like PayPal and Stripe helped reshape digital commerce by making transactions easier and faster. But even with all the technology, the basic principle Smith described remains the same. Financial systems help move capital toward productive activity. The bigger lesson. Book 2 keeps building toward a larger understanding of economic growth. Saving matters because savings create capital. Capital matters because capital increases productivity. And banks matter because banks help capital circulate throughout the economy. The modern economy isn't just powered by labor and production. It's also powered by financial systems that connect savers, investors, businesses, and consumers together. But Adam Smith also warned about something important. Not every society uses its wealth wisely. Some societies build productive systems. Others become consumed by waste, luxury, and short-term thinking. And over time, that difference can determine whether nations grow stronger or slowly decline. That's exactly where the next chapter of Book 2 takes us. Most people assume that rich societies stay rich forever. Big cities, luxury lifestyles, massive spending, expensive entertainment, endless consumption. From the outside, everything can look successful. But Adam Smith believed appearances can be deceiving. In Book 2 of The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith repeatedly warns about something dangerous. A society that consumes too much and invests too little can slowly weaken itself over time. This is one of the deepest themes running through Book 2, because for Smith, wealth is not about how much a society spends. It's about how much productive capacity it builds, and those are not always the same thing. Looking rich versus becoming rich. Imagine two families. Family A earns good money, but almost everything gets spent immediately. Luxury cars, expensive clothes, constant upgrades, large debt payments, little saving, little investment. From the outside, they may appear wealthy. Now imagine Family B. Their lifestyle looks more modest, but they consistently invest in businesses, education, assets, and productive systems. Year after year, their productive capacity grows. At first, Family A may look more successful, but over long periods of time, Family B often becomes far stronger financially. Adam Smith believed entire societies operate in similar ways. A nation can appear prosperous while slowly weakening its long-term productive foundation. Consumption feels good immediately. This is part of why the problem becomes dangerous. Consumption delivers instant gratification. Buying things feels rewarding. Luxury feels exciting. People naturally enjoy visible success. Investment is different. Investment often requires sacrifice now for benefits later. Build a factory today. Profits may come years later. Invest in infrastructure now. Economic benefits may take decades. Train skilled workers now. Productivity gains arrive gradually. This is why long-term thinking matters so much in economics. Societies focused entirely on present consumption may neglect future productive growth. Productive investment versus wasteful spending. Smith constantly emphasized the importance of directing resources toward productive uses. Machines, factories, infrastructure, technology, education, industrial systems. These things increase future output. Now compare that to purely wasteful spending. Imagine a king who spends enormous amounts of wealth on extravagant parties, giant palaces, and luxury entertainment while neglecting roads, agriculture, and productive industry. The spending may create temporary excitement, but it does little to expand long-term productive capacity. Eventually, economic weakness starts appearing beneath the surface. Smith saw this pattern repeatedly throughout history. Societies that reinvested into productive systems often grew stronger. Societies consumed by luxury and waste often stagnated or declined. Debt can hide weakness for a while. One reason economic decline can be difficult to notice is because debt allows consumption to continue temporarily. A society can borrow money. Governments can run deficits. Consumers can finance lifestyles with credit. Businesses can survive on easy borrowing. For a while, everything may still appear prosperous, but debt cannot permanently replace productive growth. Eventually, the underlying reality matters. Is the economy becoming more productive? Is productive capacity expanding? Are investments creating future wealth? Or is society mainly consuming borrowed prosperity? Smith would likely argue that long-term wealth depends on the first path, not the second. History is full of these cycles. Throughout history, many powerful civilizations experienced similar patterns. Periods of growth often involved investment, infrastructure, innovation, industrial expansion, productive development. Later periods sometimes shifted toward excess luxury, political corruption, short-term thinking, declining investment, rising debt. Economic strength weakened gradually, not overnight, but slowly. Smith understood that prosperity is not automatic. Wealth must continuously be maintained through productive activity. This feels extremely modern. What's fascinating is how modern Smith's warnings sound today. Look around at today's economy. Social media constantly promotes consumption. People compare lifestyles online. Many businesses focus heavily on short-term appearances. Governments debate rising debt levels. Consumers increasingly finance lifestyles through borrowing. At the same time, countries compete globally in technology, infrastructure, manufacturing, artificial intelligence, industrial capacity. The same underlying question still exists. Are resources flowing toward future productive growth, or mostly toward immediate consumption? That question may determine long-term economic success more than people realize. Why some countries rise faster? Smith's framework helps explain why some countries industrialize rapidly while others struggle. Countries that consistently invest in productive capacity often experience long-term growth. They build transportation systems, energy infrastructure, education systems, factories, industrial industries. Over time, those investments compound. Productivity rises, living standards improve.
Meanwhile, societies trapped in political instability, corruption, or excessive short-term consumption may struggle to build the productive systems necessary for sustained growth. Again, Smith keeps returning to the same idea. Future prosperity depends heavily on present investment. Businesses face the same problem. This principle doesn't only apply to nations. It applies to companies too. Some businesses spend heavily trying to look successful. Luxury offices, marketing hype, short-term appearances. But they underinvest in innovation, research, systems, infrastructure, employee development. Other businesses quietly focus on building productive strength behind the scenes. Better technology, better logistics, better operations, better talent. Over time, those hidden investments often create much stronger companies. Smith's logic works at every level of economic life. Wealth is built gradually. One of the deepest lessons from Book 2 is that sustainable prosperity usually develops slowly through reinvestment, productivity growth, capital accumulation, long-term planning, not through quick displays of wealth, not through endless consumption, not through appearances. Real economic strength often grows quietly in the background long before people notice it publicly. The bigger lesson. Adam Smith wasn't against enjoyment, comfort, or higher living standards. His warning was about imbalance. A society that only consumes eventually weakens its productive foundation. A society that continuously builds productive capacity strengthens its future. This is why Book 2 focuses so heavily on capital accumulation, because capital is what allows economies to expand production over time, and without expanding production, long-term prosperity becomes difficult to sustain. At this point, Smith has assembled most of the core pieces of his growth theory: saving, investment, capital accumulation, banking, productivity, productive labor, all working together to explain how nations become wealthier over generations. Now the final step is bringing everything together. How do all these forces combine into the larger engine of economic growth itself? That's exactly what the final part of Book 2 is about.
By this point in Book 2 of The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith has slowly built a complete theory of economic growth. At first, the ideas may have seemed separate: saving, investment, capital, banks, productive labor, productivity. But now the bigger picture becomes clear. All of these forces connect together into one massive system, a system capable of transforming poor societies into wealthy civilizations. And according to Smith, the real engine driving that transformation is capital accumulation. In simple terms, societies become richer when they continuously build productive capacity. That is the core message of Book 2. Economic growth doesn't happen by magic. People sometimes talk about economic growth like it's automatic, as if countries simply become richer over time naturally. Smith disagreed. He believed prosperity depends on specific economic behaviors and institutions. A society must save resources, invest productively, expand capital, improve productivity, support trade and finance, encourage economic activity. Without these things, growth slows down or stops completely. Smith wanted readers to understand that wealth creation is not random. There are underlying mechanisms driving it. The growth cycle. By now, you can see the cycle Smith is describing. It works something like this. People save part of current production. Savings become productive investment. Investment creates capital. Capital increases productivity. Higher productivity creates more output and income. That additional wealth allows even more saving and investment. The cycle repeats. This is the engine of long-term economic growth. And once a country successfully enters this cycle, the effects can become enormous over time. Why small advantages compound? One of the most powerful parts of Smith's theory is compounding. Tiny productivity improvements may not look dramatic at first, but over decades the effects become massive. Imagine two economies. One increases productivity by just 2% per year. The other barely improves at all. At first, the difference seems small, but after decades, the gap becomes enormous. The more productive society builds, better infrastructure, stronger industries, higher incomes, more advanced technology, greater investment capacity. Growth compounds over time. This is one reason some countries pull far ahead economically while others struggle to catch up. The countries that changed history. Look at the countries that transformed the global economy over the last few centuries. During the Industrial Revolution, nations that rapidly accumulated capital experienced extraordinary growth. Factories expanded, machines increased output, transportation improved, industrial systems scaled production. Then later came new waves of productive expansion: electricity, railroads, automobiles, computers, internet infrastructure, artificial intelligence. Each wave of capital investment increased human productivity even further.
And the societies leading those transformations often became economic superpowers. Why productivity matters more than raw resources alone. One of Smith's most important insights is that productivity matters more than raw resources alone. Some countries possess enormous natural resources yet remain relatively poor. Others possess limited natural resources but become extremely wealthy. Why? Because long-term prosperity depends heavily on productive systems, technology, infrastructure, education, institutions, capital investment, industrial capacity. These things determine how effectively a society turns resources and labor into wealth. A highly productive economy can create enormous value even without massive natural advantages. Modern companies work the same way. Smith's framework also explains why some businesses dominate entire industries. The biggest companies constantly reinvest into productive systems. Amazon reinvested heavily into logistics and cloud infrastructure. Apple built powerful product ecosystems and supply chains. Tesla invested aggressively into manufacturing and battery technology. These companies didn't grow simply because they sold products. They grew because they continuously expanded productive capacity. That's exactly the process Smith described centuries ago. The invisible power of long-term thinking. One thing Book 2 makes very clear is that growth requires patience. Factories take time to build. Infrastructure develops slowly. Technology advances through years of investment. Education produces results over generations. Productive capacity compounds gradually. This is why short-term thinking can become dangerous. Societies obsessed only with immediate consumption may underinvest in the future. Meanwhile, societies willing to sacrifice some present consumption for future productive expansion often grow much stronger over time. Smith saw this as one of the fundamental differences between stagnation and progress. Economic growth changes human life. It's easy to forget how dramatic economic growth really is. For most of human history, ordinary people lived in extreme poverty. Food shortages were common. Life expectancy was low. Production limits were severe. Then productivity began accelerating. Industrial systems expanded. Technology improved. Capital accumulated. And living standards rose dramatically. Modern transportation, modern medicine, electricity, digital technology, global trade. All of these things became possible because productive capacity expanded generation after generation. Smith was among the first thinkers to clearly explain the underlying process behind that transformation, the hidden foundation of modern civilization. What makes the wealth of nations so important is that Smith wasn't just describing business. He was explaining the foundations of modern civilization itself, why cities grow, why industries emerge, why economies expand, why living standards improve. At the center of all of it sits productivity growth powered by capital accumulation. This is the hidden engine beneath modern prosperity. The end of Book 2. By the end of Book 2, Adam Smith has completely shifted the conversation from simple trade toward dynamic economic growth. Book 1 explained how wealth is created through specialization and exchange. Book 2 explains how wealth continuously expands through saving, investment, banking, and capital accumulation. Together, these two books form the foundation of classical economics, and many of Smith's ideas still shape the modern world today. But Smith's journey isn't over yet. Next, the wealth of nations begins moving into even larger questions. How do governments affect economies? What policies help nations grow? When should governments intervene? What causes empires to rise or decline? And how do taxes, trade restrictions, and political power shape economic life? That's where the next stage of the wealth of nations begins.